As a child of the 1980s, there was no more compelling character in all of Saturday Night Live than this one. Could we get that picture? For those of you too young to know, this is Dana Carvey playing the church lady on Saturday Night Live. Her name was supposedly Enid Strict, and she debuted on television in 1986. In an interview with David Letterman, Carvey says that he patterned the character after the church ladies that would comment growing up whenever his family would miss a Sunday worship service. The family would show back up the next Sunday embarrassed and ready to explain why they hadn't been to church the week before. And he said these ladies would look at his mom and say, "Well, I see the Carvey family decided to show up in the Lord's congregation. It seems like some of us come to church when it's convenient. Isn't that special?" It was a caricature that resonated with so many people because so many of us knew the church lady who thinks she's superior to everybody else. It's not always a lady, because they follow the rules. They think that they're more righteous than other people, and they're eager to confess everybody else's sins, but not their own. It's what we call self-righteousness, thinking that we're better than other people, that we have something to boast about. Self-righteousness, it's an ugly thing. And it's a far more common problem than we realize, and it's not something exclusive to people who are religious. How does the gospel speak into this reality and give us something that's more beautiful and more satisfying and more compelling than the church lady? We're going to read from the 3rd chapter of Paul's letter to the Romans, verses 9 to 12, and then I'm going to pick it up again at verse 19. This is God's word. What shall we conclude then? Are we any better? Not at all. We've already made the charge that Jews and Gentiles alike are all under sin. As it is written, there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands, no one who seeks God. All have turned away, and they have together become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. Now we know that whatever the law says, that's God's law, it says to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be silenced and the whole world held accountable to God. Therefore, no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by observing the law. Rather, through God's law, we become conscious of our sin. But now, a righteousness from God, apart from law, has been made known, to which the law and the prophets testify. This righteousness from God comes through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no difference, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God and are justified freely by His grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. God presented Him, that is Jesus, as a sacrifice of atonement through faith in His blood. He did this to demonstrate His justice, because in His forbearance He had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. He did it to demonstrate His justice at the present time, so as to be just and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus. Where then is boasting? It is excluded. On what principle? On that of observing the law? No, but on that of faith. For we maintain that a person is justified by faith apart from observing God's law. Well, what do we see here about self-righteousness? I mean, one thing we see is that everybody is guilty of it. We're all tempted to boast in something. The whole point that Paul drives here is, where then is boasting? It's excluded. Being self-righteous is a form of boasting. Whether you say it out loud or whether it's just hiding in your heart. To boast is to brag, to make like you're better than other people because of something that you have or something that you do. And we're all tempted to boast in something. We're all tempted to brag, even if it's quietly in our heart and we don't even hear it. This is whatever you tend to think makes you a good person, whatever makes you stand out, whatever makes you better than those other people who aren't better. It's what you build your significance on. It may be what you judge other people for lacking. What makes you roll your eyes at somebody else, a human being made in God's image, that makes you think that you're superior to them? See, because everybody's guilty of this. We're all tempted to boast in something. And you could be self-righteous about anything. He singles out Jews and Gentiles alike. Jewish people, like Paul, thought that they were better because they had God's law and they had the commandments and they had the sacrifices, the temple, and all of that. And the Gentiles thought the Jews were stuck up and not as good as them, not as cultured, not as sophisticated. And Paul's point is there's no difference, not even one, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. There's no difference. We're all guilty of it. Where then is boasting, he says? It is excluded. Now, you can be righteous, self-righteous about anything, and it's usually about something good, some blessing God has given you, some ability, some provision, some experience that you should give thanks to God for, but instead we're tempted to boast about it. And I want to qualify this because there's a difference between being excited about something and boasting about it. Being excited is, wow, God's really blessed me with this. This is amazing. Boasting is weaponizing that to make other people seem smaller in your heart than you are. I have some pictures of what boasting can look like. Kids, you might recognize some of these. Let's get that next one. I call this bracelet righteousness. We've got another one. Not very convincing. Wait till middle school. We got another one. You know, this is called being a sore winner. When you're wanting everybody else to know that we are the champions of the world. You can be self-righteous about anything. You know, a lot of times we're kind of like puffer fish because it can flow from our insecurity. Everybody know puffer fish? We got a photo of a puffer fish, really cute puffer fish. They're kind of rounded faces and a little smile, little dimples at the corners, really cute until a bigger fish comes by. And then they feel really insecure. And what do? We got a slide. Yeah, they puff. They make themselves bigger. Same guy, just, and we and our own insecurities can then look for something that can make us puffed up and feel bigger and feel more significant. Because inwardly we know we're not really that big, but we're going to fake it really well. It's unhealthy for humans because God didn't make us to be pufferfish. He made pufferfish to be pufferfish. It's a survival mechanism. But for us, it causes us to then look down upon others because of what we have. Thank you. We can be self-righteous about anything. What about you adults? You can have the kind of church lady religious self-righteousness. You can have a theological self-righteousness, particularly if you're reformed like me, where I remember in seminary, I would watch Benny Hinn. You all remember him? You know, he's one of those televangelists who stole money from people and threw his white blazer in order to slay people in the Holy Ghost. I remember in seminary, I would watch it just to make fun of him, just to laugh. And I think, looking back, wow, that was really self-righteous. It was a theological self-righteousness. You can be self-righteous about how merciful you are. If everybody was as merciful as me, the world would be a better place. You can be self-righteous about your career or about your finances. Or, heaven forbid, this time of year, Lord have mercy on us all, political self-righteousness. My tribe is better. Look at those buffoons. Look at those idiots. Look at how stupid they are. We're so much better. It doesn't matter if you're left, right, or in the middle, sandpox on both your houses. It's self-righteousness. And it's wrong. It stinks before God because we're not righteous, because there is no one righteous, not even one. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Boasting is therefore excluded. You can be self-righteous about how tolerant you are. Lord, I thank you that I'm not like other men. I am so open-minded and charitable and tolerant. You can be self-righteous about your quality of life, what kind of toys you have, what kind of image you project. You can be self-righteous about your physical body and appearance. You can be self-righteous about what a helper you are, always needing to be needed so that you can feel significant about yourself. You can be self-righteous about your productivity or about your strength and power and influence, about your recognition. Look at all my accomplishments. You can be self-righteous about your intellect. Lord, I thank you that I am not like other men. I am better read, smarter, more savvy, and more sophisticated, obviously superior. You can be self-righteous about your ethnicity or race, as we see with white supremacy, with the sin of racism. You can be self-righteous about your culture, about your marriage. You know you're self-righteous about your marriage if you think that you have to project that your marriage has it all together. And, of course, the thing you'll be really angry about, of course, will be your spouse, because they're the thing keeping you from having the perfect marriage. You can be self-righteous about your parenting skills. Lord, I thank you that I homeschool, private school, public school. Here are my reasons and why it's better. And of course, if you're really self-righteous about being the perfect parent, then of course, what are you going to be mad at all the time? Your kids, because they're keeping you from being the perfect parent. You can be self-righteous about your authenticity. I don't have to pretend like everyone else. I'm the genuine article. Or I heard one pastor say this, and so I'll just pass it on. There is team righteousness. That's what happens in those years when the St. Louis Cardinals go to the World Series and win it, and all the St. Louisans are going around saying, "We're number one!" And you're thinking, well, I don't remember seeing you up to bat. You can be self-righteous about anything. We're all guilty of it, and you know that you really don't get it if you go home and you start complaining about all the self-righteous people. We can be blind to it. I remember how blind I was once. My previous car was a Mini Cooper. We've got a photo. This isn't mine. Mine didn't have the racing stripes, but it was a yellow Cooper, white top, 2005. I loved that car. I drove it into the ground. It was over 13 years old by the time I finally traded it in, because everything was not working. Nothing was working. The seat recliner worked. It was manual. But I loved that car. I remember once, a number of years ago, I was right at Kings Highway and Highway 40. That's Interstate 64 to you other people. And a lovely lady with a street address on Portland Place smashed into the back of my Mini Cooper. And when I saw that her insurance card was Chubb, I thought, well, this could be good. It wasn't. And so when Enterprise Rent-A-Car, picked me up, they took me to this tiny little South City Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and they had only one car left on the lot. And it looked like this next picture. It was a 2013 four-door white Kia rental with minor body damage in front. And I remember driving that thing. I had to come back to church afterwards, and I remember pulling here into the Circle Drive thinking, gosh, I hope nobody sees me in this. And then it dawned on me. Though I had never vocalized it, I had never recognized it, I had never realized it, I had Cooper righteousness. Because I thought that car made me sophisticated and clever and smart. I named the Cooper Alice Cooper. I hated to get rid of her. But you can be self-righteous about anything. It's like the humble brag. That's good for get that thing out of here. I don't want to be associated with it. It's like the humble brag. When you pretend to be humble in order to draw attention to yourself, like, I'm so terrible with money, I just spent $2,000 on this purse. What are you saying? You're not really saying that you're bad with money. You're saying you can afford to spend $2,000 on a purse. I'm so awful at relaxing. I'm always working such long hours. I am such a hard worker. If everybody else worked as hard as I did, the world would be a better place. I can't believe I was actually invited to another VIP event. I'm a very important person. I hate my Bentley. It's such a gas guzzler. My charity work keeps me so busy. Self-righteousness, it can be subtle. Sometimes we don't even know if we're just wanting to share something in our life that we're excited about, or if we're actually bragging, because we can't even know our own hearts. But you can be self-righteous about everything, anything. Everybody's guilty of it. And neither the world nor religion can offer any help at all. What are your possible solutions? How do we get rid of self-righteousness? Well, you could say, let's do the Christian thing and just use a biblical moral standard. But that's what the Jewish people had been doing, and Paul says that they didn't have a chance. that there's none righteous, not even one. That just turns you into the church lady, and the Gentiles are cursed God because of you. There is none righteous, not even one. Jews and Gentiles alike are all under sin. That's the Lord. I thank you that I'm not like other men. I tithe and I obey all your laws, and I do everything you want, Lord. When Jesus says it's the guy who doesn't do that, but won't even look up to heaven and says, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. That's the one who goes home justified. That is righteous in God's sight, worthy in God's eyes. Okay, you say, all right, so we don't just use a biblical standard for our self-righteousness. We could get rid of self-righteousness by developing a holy crusade against all the self-righteous people. But that's just self-righteousness in disguise. Lord, I thank you that I'm not one of those self-righteous people. Who are you kidding? We could do the thing that kind of the 1990s modern, postmodern, trendy 30 years ago thing and just say, well, all truth is relative. Let's just get rid of all value systems and say they're just human constructs. They don't actually have any objective reality. But then why do you not throw people off the top of a building to their death? Why do you not push away people who are different from you? Our longing for justice is not a human construct. It's because God made us in his image with a sense of right and wrong, in the sense that things ought to be a certain way. And they're not that way, but they still ought to be. It's not a construct. It's the heart of God reflected in the image of God in all of humanity. So there's no way out of this. The world doesn't have a solution. Religion doesn't have a solution. Even a biblical self-righteousness doesn't give us a solution. So how does the gospel of Jesus Christ offer us a way forward that's beautiful, compelling, liberating, and satisfying? First of all, the gospel invites us to be open about being broken, because the gospel says that we are so bad that our best friend Jesus had to die for us, and that we are so weak and helpless that we couldn't do anything about it ourselves. The gospel, therefore, invites us to be open about being broken. Jews and Gentiles alike, all are under sin. There is none righteous, not even one. Not even one. It's not that we all took a test and we all failed with a 58.5%. No, we all took the test and we failed with a 0. And the gospel tells us we can be honest about that. I've failed everybody in my life. It's what we call humility. It's not that we're saying we're as bad as we could possibly be, but every single part of my life, psyche, body, everything fails to measure up. I got a 0. And this levels the playing field. There's no more comparing good people and bad people, and our group and those inferior people over there, because everybody gets a 0. We have nothing to be self-righteous about, and so it kills our comparisons. There is no difference, he says. Sometimes we in the church can take God's mercy for granted and not recognize it as mercy, but just think it's lower standards on God's part. And when we do that, we really do lose sight of the gospel altogether. I remember R.C. Sproul in one of his seminary classes. He had an assignment, not a big one, but first week, the first assignment was due, and he starts going down the roll call, and people are turning in their assignments. One guy's like, oh, Dr. Sproul, I'm so sorry. The dog ate it, and my computer blew up, and I got sucked up into a tornado, and it was just horrible, but I promise I'll get it to you before the end of the day. And he's like, all right. And then everybody else is fine. The next week, time to turn in your assignments. Most of them have their assignments done. 3 or 4 people are like, oh, Dr. Sproul, we're so sorry. We'll get it to you next week, or we'll get it to you tomorrow. He's like, all right, tomorrow. The next time, 2/3 of the class didn't do their assignment. He starts going through the roll call. Adams, F. Baker, F. Chapman, F. Drexler, F. And what do you think? Everybody roared all at once. That's not fair. You know the responsive reading. You're Americans. Some of you. Or you've been around them. No, it's absolutely fair. The assignment was due that day. You didn't turn it in. You get a 0. You get an F. And sometimes God keeps forgiving us, and we just think, he doesn't really care about sin. Oh, he cares about sin. It offends his character. It breaks his shalom. It mars the human condition. It damages creation. It distracts from his holiness. There is none righteous. Not even one. Not even a 59% F. It's a 0. The gospel invites us to be open about being broken because it is a big deal and it's a part of our lived experience. But don't think you're better off for being open about being broken. Lord, look at me. I'm so open about my brokenness. Self-righteousness. There is no difference. It's as if Jesus exchanged report cards with us. This is the gospel. We get an F, a 0. And God says, why should I let you into my heaven? Well, I got a 0.5 in one area, God. Well, that's really impressive. Well, I never robbed a liquor store, but did you love me with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength? And did you love your neighbor as yourself? No. Did you do all of that for even 1 second? No. There is none righteous. By the works of the law will no one be declared righteous in God's eyes. There is no difference. It's a report card of zeros. We're broken. We aren't good people according to how the Bible defines good. At best, we're image bearers who are filled with sin, and the only reason we haven't become worse is because of God's restraining grace, and there's nothing we can do to fix it. And the gospel frees us up to be open about this. How many of you kids have heard about Humpty Dumpty? Let me see some hands. Any of you heard about Humpty Dumpty? Okay, some of you have heard about Humpty Dumpty. What species was Humpty Dumpty? Was he a chicken? Was he a human? Was he a dog? Was he a polar bear? Now, what was Humpty Dumpty? Humpty Dumpty was an egg, yes. We've got a picture of him. This is sort of the before. What happened to Humpty Dumpty, though, is that he sat on a wall, and because he's ovoid, if you're looking for a 5-letter wordle right there, that's a good one, ovoid. He's ovoid, and so he sat on a wall, and he had a great fall. And we've got another picture. But all is not lost because we have all the king's horses and we got all the king's men, and they're going to put Humpty together again, right? No, I heard it over here. It's the only children's story that doesn't end happily ever after, except for maybe some of the original versions of Grimm's fairy tales. Humpty was fallen and nobody could fix him. He literally fell to pieces, and at best he was just a shell of his former self. That's us until Jesus shows up. We've fallen and we can't put ourselves back together again, and we get to be honest about that. Kids growing up, some of you kids are growing up with parents. And growing up with parents is like being a little sinner growing up with 2 much larger sinners in the house with you all the time. And you're going to see your parents make mistakes. You're going to see your parents sin. They may get angry and say things that aren't very kind. They may talk about somebody that's not there in ways that aren't very nice. Your parents are going to sin because we're sinners, and that's why we sin, because we're damaged, and so we act like we're damaged. We act like we're broken because we are. And the best thing that your parents can do for you is to be honest about that, because know what happens when they're honest about it? Is you see Jesus. You see grace. You see the gospel, because we're not pretending. We're not hiding behind a veneer of self-righteousness. We're admitting that we all need forgiveness because we're all sinners. We're all broken. And the gospel then gives us a better righteousness than any sham righteousness we'd come up with ourselves. Paul says, but now a righteousness from God, apart from what we do, has been made known. This righteousness from God comes through faith in Jesus Christ to everyone who believes. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God and are justified, that is, declared righteous, declared good enough, worthy enough, freely by God's grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. Jesus on the cross took your all zeros report card and he erased your name and he put Jesus Christ, or Christ, Jesus on the top of it so it could be filed. And he took that report card all the way to the cross. and paid the consequences for it. And then, because it's not just forgiveness, he credits righteousness to us when we believe him. He then takes his credit card, his report card. What do you think Jesus had on his report card? Think a lot of B's? Nah, straight A's, 100%, all the way down. Totally worthy. And he takes his report card and he erases Christ, comma, Jesus off of the top, and he puts your last name, comma, your first name. And you then get to take that report card all the way to the judgment seat of God, where you will be rewarded because you have Jesus' report card, and you deserve to be blessed because God has united you to Jesus, who is deserving of being blessed. We maintain that a man is justified, declared righteous and worthy by faith apart from what he does. All you need is nothing. It says it's to those who believe apart from what they do. It's the empty hands of faith. All you need is nothing, though most folks don't have that. A man is justified by faith apart from what he does, by faith alone. All you have to do is trust Jesus when he says he will save you. Jesus calls it a narrow path as opposed to religion's wide path that many walk down. He compares it to fitting a camel through the eye of a needle. You have to drop everything else in order to squeeze through. It's only possible with God. What you have to give up is your self-righteousness, because Jesus saves, and him alone, and he saves completely. And there is nothing you can do to embellish the report card of Jesus Christ. A few weeks ago, I quoted Robert Capon when he said that this epistle to the Romans has sat around throughout church history like a bomb waiting to go off. And every time somebody picks up this letter to the Romans, the gospel blows up, and people are liberated and freed, and people then actually begin wanting to serve God and wanting to do what he says, because they're no longer on a performance treadmill. They have been loved and been brought into the family of God with a new identity as children and heirs, who then have a heart change that makes them eager to live out that new identity as those who have an inheritance, because they are worthy, they are saints, they are holy ones in God's eyes. The only sad thing, Capon says, is that the church as an institution has spent most of its time playing bomb squad and trying to defuse it. The danger to the church, a lot of times we get this wrong. We think of too radical of grace on one side and legalism on the other, and the gospel somewhere in between. No, it's the gospel and every corruption of it. The gospel is what's the power of God to save. You may distort the gospel in ways that diminish the gospel and cause you to miss the gospel, cause you to miss Jesus, cause you to miss salvation. Yeah, you can do that by being the self-righteous one, saying, I'm a good person. I don't need Jesus to die for me. I am worthy in my own right. And that diminishes the gospel, because you are saying you don't need it. It's not good enough. On the other side, you could say, it doesn't matter what I do. It's all grace. And yet, you know what that does when you're saying God doesn't really care about sin? Is you're diminishing the gospel, because he does care about sin, and you need the gospel. And if you're living a licentious life, it's not because you're taking the gospel too far, it's because you're not taking it far enough. Because we're so much worse than we realize. And the gospel is so much bigger and so much more powerful and so much more beautiful. All you need is nothing, and my prayer is that you, my siblings in Jesus, would get nothing. Because when you have nothing and you come to Jesus, you gain everything in this life and in the age to come. It leaves us with no one we can judge except ourselves, and even there we can give ourselves some mercy, because we know our sin has been forgiven and we've been clothed with the righteousness of Christ, and we can therefore be honest, because we have the emotional space to be honest about how bad we are. Because we know we're loved and we know we're secure. This is the costly pearl that the woman swept her entire house for until she found it. This is that treasure in a field that once you realize how big the treasure is, you sell everything else and get rid of it all. Filthy rags. You get rid of it all in order to gain that treasure, which is Jesus. Sometimes when people hear the short version of my own Christian testimony, they assume that my testimony is that of a prodigal son from a far-off land coming. And in one sense, as the gay atheist teenager in the 1980s, I was a prodigal son in a far-off place. But at the same time, when I look back at my story, I don't see the prodigal son. I see myself as the elder brother. Because when I was a kid, there were all sorts of areas where I was really insecure. I was not good at athletics. I was not strong. I was not big. I was not fast. I was not popular. I was not cool. I did not have the best clothes, though I liked my clothes. My parents didn't live in a big mansion. We lived in Dale City, Virginia, very middle class. And so I always felt very insecure and like I was always afraid. And yet what I found in elementary school, probably by third or fourth grade, I found that there was one thing I was good at, and that was academics. I knew how to study. I knew how to take a test. I knew how to finish a project. And I knew how to get an A. In fact, I knew how to get all A's. And so I excelled, and I got, segmented off into the gifted program, and I took all the advanced placement classes in high school, and even though I didn't know God, I was very driven because that was the one thing where I could be worthy, the one thing where I could be significant, the one area where I could say, I am better than everyone else in this room. I graduated high school 4th out of 600 students, and I can tell you those 3 at the top why they didn't deserve it, because they took easier classes. You got an A in PE. Well, aren't you just so wonderful? Isn't it special? It was self-righteousness. I had 34 credit hours at the University of Virginia by the time I graduated high school, just from all the advanced placement coursework and testing I'd done, basically a year of college. I was the president of Teenage Republicans. I was the president of the French Club. I was the president of the Math Club. I was the Undersecretary General of Model United Nations, but I did all the work. And I was on its academic debate team, I built the resume, and I was proud of that resume. That was my righteousness. That was my identity. And then I went off to college, and I met Jesus. And he came crashing into my life. He showed me I had no righteousness of my own. He used other areas to show me that. But he showed me I had no hope. And seeing Jesus and meeting Jesus and experiencing his salvation gave me the freedom, I thought, to put away that academic self-righteousness. And I even started observing the Sabbath on Sundays instead of doing homework and papers and projects because I wanted to trust him, because I didn't need an A in order to be significant anymore. And then I went off to seminary. In my first semester at seminary, I took Dr. Richard Winter's Introduction to Biblical Counseling, and he gave us a project, and I ran out of time, so I cheated and turned it in. I mean, cheating is a strong term, but I cheated and turned it in. And then somebody called me on it, and so I had to go meet with him and tell him what I'd done, and he told me I could go back and redo it properly and turn it in, and the highest grade I would get on that project was a C. So I did that, turned it in, did a great job, got my C, and then at the end of the semester, I tabulated up my grades for the class, and I realized that even with that C on the main project, I still had a 90% A, maybe A minus, probably A, and when I got my report card, it said B plus. And I remember mentioning it to Diane Preston, the registrar there, and I told her, I know that was a 90, maybe a 91. That should have been some kind of A. He gave me a B plus, and she said, well, now, faculty make mistakes, and you just need to let them know, but don't go in there, angry and accusatory. And I said, yeah, that wouldn't look good. And she said, no, Greg, that wouldn't be good. I think you need to accept the B plus. She was the most intuitive pastor on that campus, and they didn't consider her a pastor. She sized up my soul that quickly that I was more concerned with looking good than being good. And my repentance looked like accepting the B plus, even though I earned an A minus. Friends, the gospel lets us do that because there is none righteous, not even one. but Jesus justifies the ungodly with a suit of righteousness that can never be removed. Let's pray.